Before I start, I want to get a few things straight. I've been backhandedly negative towards this game in past reviews, even throwing 2 deep cuts at it in my very first video. I don't want to hide my dislike for this game, but I do want to assure that I'm going at this video as fair as I can be. There's a lot that Demon's Souls accomplishes in terms of level design and art direction. However, it becomes increasingly difficult for me to praise the game when looking at it as a whole. But I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm sure you didn't come here for me to give you my complete thoughts on the game within the first paragraph of the script, so allow me to start over. First and foremost, with apologies for this introduction being as dry as my ex's. Demon's Souls is an action RPG developed by From Software, a Japanese developer formerly known for developing Kingsfield. Holy shit, they made 4 of these? It opens with a cutscene explaining the backstory of the area that you'll be inhabiting. Recently, a strange ethereal fog has enveloped the kingdom of Boletaria. Anyone who went in to see what was happening was never to be seen again. Eventually, someone escaped the fog and explained everything. King Allant of Boletaria had awoken the Great One, a godlike creature that commanded demons with powerful souls. After being awoken, the Great One set out a slew of demons to torment the inhabitants of the kingdom. These demons were fueled by souls, and collecting a demon's soul boasted an insane amount of power. With the fog and demons slowly seeping past Boletaria, every warrior with a shred of confidence ventured into the kingdom to do their part. This is a fantastic story setup. It not only gives the player a proper reason for being here, but also sets up a great foundation for an RPG experience. It's implied that for everyone braving the fog to save Boletaria, there are even more simply looking for power. This applies to your character as well and helps to add to the RPG experience. Are you there as a ruthless murderer only concerned with your own self-interests, or are you a hero who intends to protect and help the NPCs around you? You're given a small tutorial stage with a boss that you're meant to die to. Even if you do kill him, the next room is just a late game boss that literally decks you so hard you pop into a different dimension. It's here where you're introduced to the Nexus, the game's hub area. And I've heard a lot of praise for it being the best hub in the series, though I'm not sure if I hold the same sentiment. It's definitely visually appealing and harbors an oppressive atmosphere, like everything else in the game, but other than that, there's kind of fuck all to it. Not much to explore other than when you're told to find the monumental, and it's just kind of empty. It does the bare minimum of what a hub world should do. It's not bad, just not great. The Nexus also presents the soul form mechanic of Demon's Souls to the player. After dying in human form, the player respawns in soul form, which also halves your health. Human form is gained back by various rare items and killing bosses, thus bringing your health back. I'll talk more on this later when one of my biggest points in the video comes up. What is great though is the first area the player gets to explore, 1-1. This area is a fantastic example of FromSoft's spectacular level design. It revolves around trying to open the main gate to the kingdom, meaning the player has to move around the castle walls, opening towers as shortcuts and getting small glimpses of the city within until they finally manage to open up the gate to the boss arena. Which makes me sad to say that Phalanx isn't really all that special. It's essentially a gaggle of NPCs scattered around an arena that you get to one-shot. Good thing FromSoft didn't replicate this in other games. What is cool about Phalanx is the lore around them. From what I remember from my fuzzy alcohol-induced memories of Vadi Vigil lore videos, Phalanx used to be a master archer that would snipe foes from outside the castle walls, taking credit for kills, but constantly hiding behind their walls of shielded warriors who were putting themselves in actual danger. When the Demon Scourge hit, many of Boletaria's great warriors were turned into exaggerated versions of themselves. The Tower Knight was given a massive size and an even bigger great shield, which seemed to complement his prowess as a warrior, whereas Phalanx turned into this, an amorphous blob with no combat abilities who rely solely on their shielded allies to protect them. It's a symbolic exaggeration of character flaws in a boss that you will only come to understand if you do one of 2 things. Comb through item descriptions vaguely related to the character while connecting dots in your own head, or watch a 15-minute YouTube video. After this boss, the game opens up heavily and allows the player to tackle pretty much any zone in any order that they see fit. For the sake of flow, I'll be talking about them in order from left to right. Archstone 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 respectively. That might not be the order I take for my playthrough, but with how broad the amount of choice that you have in what areas you approach, I want to focus more on how the levels are designed and where the challenge comes from in them rather than simply how challenging the area is. The game receives points for having complex enemies, ideas, or interesting environmental challenges, but loses points for just dumping enemies on the player in cramped areas and calling it a day. Again, I'm trying to be as fair as possible. 1-2 is a pretty shitty area all in all. A dragon drops from the sky to give you free points of damage every once in a while, so you're better off either sprinting past every enemy in the area or going a slower pace underneath the bridge, where you get pounced down by dogs. If you're waiting for me to say anything else, you'll be sorely disappointed because there's fucking nothing to this area. Who would have thought it's hard to make interesting and complex level design out of two straight lines? Evidently though, be it the dragon, the dogs, or the dragon, you're likely going to find yourself dying here at least once on your first playthrough. And through that death, the game will have been made objectively harder due to a mechanic this game never told you existed. The Demon's Souls veterans in the back know what I'm hinting at. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time to talk about World Tendency. World Tendency is Demon's Souls' most original and most damning mechanic. It's also very complicated to explain, so give me a moment to take a fire extinguisher to my brain so the smoke stops coming out of my fucking ears so I can do my best to lay it out for you. World Tendency is a mechanic based around white and black. White World Tendency is achieved by performing various actions such as killing bosses. Within White World Tendency, the player deals more damage and receives less from enemies. However, Black World Tendency is the opposite, causing the player to deal less damage and receive more. Enemies are, however, more likely to drop rare items in Black World Tendency, and there are so-called tendency events that happen within specific worlds if you achieve pure white or pure black. So if killing bosses shifts the world to white, how do you shift the world to black? Well, dying in human form, of course. Well, that's not entirely true. Dying in the Nexus while human is safe, which means the only surefire way to keep your world from falling into Black World Tendency is to Foxconn employee your way off the staircase every time you kill the boss, which is a great way to kill the high of overcoming a challenging encounter. Wow, that boss was really fun to fight and hard to beat. Well, excuse me while I kill myself. It's like players have to follow the logic of a fucking Newgrounds animation. And guess what? I haven't even explained the worst part. Throughout the whole runtime of this entire fucking game, not once does it explain this incredibly complicated and potentially game-breaking mechanic to the player. This mechanic would provide an interesting choice that impacts the way that you play the game if it was implemented well. Do you want to play the game with full health most of the time but things are harder to kill? Or do you want to play the game with less health but enemies are a bit easier? Instead, the game entered your room saying nothing and waited for you to answer that awkwardly abrupt intrusion with either option 1 or option 2. And if you took too long to answer, it just chose 2 for you and promptly shot you in the fucking knees. And for those of you who are going to use the just grab the cling ring and 1-1 if you don't want to deal with World Tendency argument, I'm glad you decided to drop in. Because despite arguments that World Tendency is good because it offers a complex choice of slightly harder but more health and rare items versus easier but with less health, you've decided to advertise the item in the game that negates the choice because it takes away the downside of White World Tendency. But I've screeched enough. The level ends with the Tower Knight, who gets a lot of praise for having the method for beating him overblown to high hell. People use the Tower Knight to paint bosses in Demon's Souls as puzzles that you have to figure out and defeat correctly. However, the puzzle for the Tower Knight is to attack the only part of his body you would reasonably be able to. So many people think it's overwhelmingly stellar game design that you're supposed to attack his ankles, and when you do that enough, he falls down. Don't get me wrong though, I don't think this fight is bad. He's a bit janky to fight, but watching him collapse after gnawing on his Achilles heel for a bit is pretty satisfying to do, albeit bad for your teeth. From this point, the player is presented with a fog wall that can't be passed until you defeat at least one archdemon, the final bosses of the Archstones. So from here on out, I'll be talking about everything in the second Archstone, then the third, then the fourth, then the fifth, in order to work my way all the way around. Then back to finish the first Archstone. This means starting with 2-1. Thank God, too, because we haven't quite approached the offensively bad areas yet, and 2-1 is fairly fun to explore. It's got an element of verticality with its level design that leads to a super interesting shortcut and has a visual style that feels fresh and unique, albeit a bit monochromatic. Come to think of it, every Archstone seems to run by a specific color theme. Orange, green, gray, brown, and... The Armor Spider is a shitty-ass boss, though. This might come down to me simply being bad at fighting him, but he seems to have been designed around ranged builds, dodging his projectiles while firing your own. But that also just fucks melee builds over in the most annoying way. Apologies that I don't adhere to ranged weapons in my videos here, I'm just the type of person who appreciates enjoyable gameplay. 2-2 is opened up immediately after killing the Armor Spider, and you're given an area that's so painfully meh that I run through the second half of it every playthrough out of sheer fucking boredom. There's literally nothing else to say about it. The entire area is a run up to Flamelurker, who's a pretty solid boss fight all things considered. He's Bloodborne levels of aggressive and has a lot of power behind his attacks. The arena is also big enough to where the clunkiness of the game doesn't show as much, since Demon's Souls was the first game to trap the player behind 4-directional rolling. Archstone 2 is closed off with the Dragon God, who's hyped up in the opening cinematic and the cover of the game so much that it's honestly insulting how simple the fight ends up being. You sneak past pillars, press 2 buttons, and hit him in the head until he dies. Thanks for playing and go fuck yourself, I guess. On the bright side, the Archstone that immediately follows is Archstone 3, which is some of the best content in the Souls series. The area people are most prone to on-the-spot sucking is the Tower of Latria, or 3-1. 3-1 opens in a prison with some astoundingly Lovecraft-inspired guards patrolling the halls and keeping the prisoners in check. The area revolves around working your way through the available parts of the prison and finding various keys to unlock paths to new floors. It's very much exploration focused and thrives on that. Save for another glaring issue with Demon's Souls' design, that being item burden. Item burden is probably one of the stupidest decisions I've ever seen made in a video game. If the name wasn't self-explanatory, item burden is a system where there's a cap on the amount of items you can pick up. Everything from armor to consumables has a weight, and hitting a certain weight limit from items you've picked up means that you can't pick up any more items. Even worse, you can't even see what exactly you're trying to pick up when you're over-encumbered. You have to drop various items onto the ground, see whether it's worth your time, then decide on taking it. This is flow breaking in ways I don't think I need to describe, and it only amplifies the issue when you realize the only way to effectively pick up a new armor set when over-encumbered is to walk all the way back to the Archstone, take a nice long loading screen back to the Nexus, talk to this guy and dump all your items onto him, take another nice long loading screen, fight through every enemy again, then get back to where the item was and realize it despawned, because after it's been put into this dropped state, it must then be picked up before the world reloads or it's gone forever. Will this happen often? No. But the fact that it can happen at all due to a system that shouldn't be in the game in the fucking first place is insulting. Apologies if it seems I'm trying to undermine the objective quality of this area. It's just that the fluted armor drop is where I always run into this issue, and the long run up to the boss makes this a good area to demonstrate my point. This area is phenomenal though. Not just phenomenal because I'm directly comparing it to the dogshit quality of other areas in this game, it's genuinely amazing. Only large downside to it is the boss, the Fool's Idol. Her big gimmick is that she spawns clones of herself and hides around the arena. Imagine the Crystal Sage in Prowling Magus' boss room. The fight is just annoying, teleporting away from you, then having one of her clones freeze you in place like a cunt. After defeating Belle Delphine, you get picked up by 2 gargoyles and ascend to my personal favorite area of the game. 3-2 revolves around massive bridges that connect to a giant Lovecraftian brain monster in a bog down below. The brain monster is blocking your access to the boss room, so you must maneuver around the bridges in order to break the chains holding it up, unlocking shortcuts along the way. Biggest shortcut being the fact that the boss room is always right next to the Archstone, but with something blocking it. This leads to the Man-Eaters, a pretty decent boss, albeit with a pretty shitty arena. One straight line with some gargoyles flying around it, fucking stellar. The final boss of the third Archstone is the Old Monk, who's intended to be a PvP fight, so I won't give any thoughts on the boss since I've technically never fought him the way that he was intended. Even when I played this a couple of years ago when the servers were still up, I didn't run into any invaders, so I'll save this fight for when I review the remake. Moving on, we have 4-1, an area that's about as bland as its color palette. It's kinda cool that you get to face off against Vanguard again, and the Skyrays shooting AC-130s at you make for a good survival horror segment for Steve Irwin fans. But other than that, there isn't much astoundingly amazing level design or cool boss. The Adjudicator is fucking boring. Moving on. 4-2 is a bit better in terms of design and feels a lot more visually appealing with ghost enemies and cool cloaked guys conjuring them up. However, the lack of any shortcut to the boss makes it a chore to sprint through if you manage to die to Stevie Wonder over here. He's got a cool moveset, but the fact that the game gives you an essentially unlimited amount of healing items makes him a fucking pushover. Especially if you're tackling him late game. The third Archdemon is the King of the Storm, where you stand in a house and fire ranged attacks at a giant stingray. Don't have ranged attacks? Here, take this greatsword you'll never use again and get out of my fucking sight. The last Archstone we have to complete before looping back to the first is the 5-1 is like the gutter but with somehow less fun design, funneling enemies into your face at rapid succession on really narrow pathways to make sure you know fun like a virgin knows pillow talk. And as a former virgin, that's a pretty fucking bold statement. You reach the bottom and fight Leechmonger. And maybe I've been clubbed too many times, but I'm struggling to articulate the joke I have in my head about how this boss relates to me leeching off of Shammy's creative style. So I'll leave it there and brag that I'm the first one to ever hand the punchline to the audience and let them make their own fucking setup. I know, aren't I just the pinnacle of creativity? Moving on, 5-2 is potentially the worst area I think I've ever seen in a video game. This is the area that inspired the Poison Swamp trend of Souls games, and it's by far the most outrageous. Say what you will about Blighttown, but at least that had a solid art direction, a good boss, and the feeling of crawling your way out of a flooded sewer when it's all said and done.
Demon's Souls' Poison Swamp seems to just be here to pad out gameplay and make it feel longer. As though they took a giant empty room with a boss arena at the end and realized last minute that that's a horrible idea and added in a slow effect in poison to make it seem like they put thought into it. Not only is this boring, tedious, and fucking annoying, but it's downright fucking lazy in the most insulting way that I could possibly think of. It ends with the Dirty Colossus, a boss that you'd be understood for mistaking for the Leechmonger, because it essentially is. Only instead of throwing leeches, he throws dirt. After him is Maiden Estrella, a boss that sicks an NPC on you and calls it a day. Oh, and by the way, that NPC is really shitty at fighting. With all the archdemons defeated, we make our way back over to Archstone 1, where we stumble across our first well-designed level since the Tower of Latria. This level is fun to explore, filled with cool encounters and shortcuts, and has interesting means of getting around gates. It's cool as a player to be put into the position of someone trying to break into a castle, shimmying along walls and fighting small groups of infantry to push ahead. It ends with the Penetrator, and obvious jokes aside, this is another fight that's ruined by Demon's Souls just being the first game in the series. He's got cool attacks and is very powerful, but the fact that you by this point will likely have a near infinite supply of healing items and that he can be easily staggered makes it a bit ironic that he's the one being fucked. 1-4 is a really bare bones area, as it serves as just a run up to Demon's Souls' final boss, who poses the biggest challenge in the entire game. So it's only fair that the run up to the hardest boss should be filled with bullshit kill zones that make repeated attempts a nightmare to get through. Seriously, for melee builds, this dragon is more of a full-blown cunt than a hooker that specializes in receiving cunnilingus. That aside, Kengalont is a good-ass fight. He's got powerful attacks, sick combos, AoEs, and a lot of fucking health. He can burst you down pretty easily, so Demon's Souls' healing problem isn't as much of an issue, and he's just plain fun. It's a good send-off to the game despite my criticisms of it. And that's pretty much the end of the game. You either lull the Great One into slumber, or give the thing a spiritual high five and become all-powerful, leaving the world to be devoured by the ethereal fog. Demon's Souls is a game I hate to call a disappointment because of how original of a concept it is. So much of this game, though, is either straight awful or better experienced in later games. So why did I make this video? Well, everywhere I look, I see people talking about how this game is a forgotten classic that deserves a spot among other Soulsborne titles. And while I think that's true to an extent, the high praise goes so far to ignore the decisions that are at best annoying and at worst infuriating. I pray that this new remake coming out will fix the problems I had with this game because there is potential for a fantastic game here. Until then, I'll acknowledge everything that this game does right, but giving it as high praise as others have makes me worried about the day that people might be talking about how my Dark Souls videos were underrated gems, and that shit gives me chills.